Hi there, this is Rona from the Hidden Gardens, and today's wee video we are going to grow some bean shoots indoors on the windowsill for salad or for putting in a wee sandwich, and we are going to start some runner bean seedlings indoors on the windowsill for growing on later in pots and to plant out in the garden. So the runner beans are not for eating the foliage. Okay, we'll start with the peas, which you can buy varieties. There's a variety called Twinkle of pea you could get mail order, and it does produce little delicate little soft tiny, and it's just for growing the foliage, to eat the foliage. I mean, it will eventually produce a pea. Marrow fat peas, which are the soup peas or the mushy peas that you get in the supermarket and you soak overnight and boil. Quite easy to get and cheap, you know, so you can get lots of them. I'm using a grape punnet, and all you really need to buy is some compost. Any multi-purpose compost whatsoever will do. So you would just check that your grape punnet has drainage holes. There's the odd brand that doesn't have, but mostly they do, so that's a perfect seed tray right there. You'd fill this up to the top and then be very generous with your planting, more so than if you were growing the peas individually in pots for the garden. Literally quite thickly. Almost can't do them too thick, as long as they're not on top of each other really, and spread them on top of the compost. Firm the whole thing down with the flat of your hand. You don't have to do wee individual holes. Just firm the whole thing and then put a slight covering of compost on the top of that. So they germinate pretty quickly in your house. Just keep them well watered. If you're very lucky, what with the drainage holes letting water out and you maybe don't want a wet windowsill, you could maybe get a mushroom punnet which they don't have any drainage holes, and that fits perfectly in it, and so that's a nice little windowsill unit there, and we've done a bit of reusing of plastics. So that's the pea foliage, and the part you eat you can just snip off. This is what you get in bags of salad, the commercial bags in the supermarket. So this is all edible, and if you leave enough behind, then the regrowth will come from every sort of joint, and eventually you could crop it 2 or 3 times, I would think. But if you keep them growing, once the roots have really filled out the punnet, and because it's clear you'll be able to see that, you have quite a little wodge of pea plants. They can be put out into the garden and grown on you in a container if you don't have a garden, you know, a big tub maybe, but also equally in the soil, and they will grow up and produce the white flower, which is characteristic of most peas, and then after the flower is pollinated by the bees, the petals drop off and the pod will grow out, and you'll get some pea pods for the kids to eat. The beans, well, there's a few different ways to get started, but one way that's quite good to do at home, have cardboard tubes, which we've all got, and again with my grape punnets, check that it's got drainage holes, and if it doesn't have, poke some through, maybe adults do. The cardboard tubes, they slot quite nicely in, and I've found you can kind of measure it. Sometimes that's a slightly different size, but it just seems to be half a dozen. Hold each other up, and the purpose of the tube, you actually really, you don't have to. You could just plant your beans into the grape punnet, but you're getting a wee advantage that you're getting a bit deeper, and the bean can circle and send its taproot down deeper. You would fill, don't worry about it all spilling in between the cardboard tubes. That's fine, it keeps them moist and it kind of keeps them upright, and to be honest, it doesn't make any difference. So do it over your bucket and then all the compost falls back in again because it's a bit messy. So any multi-purpose compost, seed compost, cutting compost, whatever will do for this, because you're only starting off the plants. It's what you put them into later, you know, that would help. So fill up your tubes. Then sometimes at home I like to soak the beans overnight. That's not absolutely essential at all. I just like to hydrate them myself, but you really don't have to. So these are dried beans straight from the packet. This is a red flowered runner bean. When it's out in the garden, it's tall. It needs something to climb on, like a trellis or a wigwam of sticks. And the red flowers, I said the pea flowers were generally white unless it's a fancy variety. This quite commonly promoted variety is a red flowered runner bean, very, very decorative. In fact, I believe when they were first introduced to the country they were grown for decoration and not as a vegetable, oddly enough. So I've got 6 ones here, so you would, this one you do when talking about not poking holes, you can pencil or just the old digit you can put in and then poke the seed. I've put it down to that about there, and I've kind of put it really doesn't matter, but I've got a habit of putting them end on like that, and fits in better. So put them all, I can still just see them, so I would then just cover over, and if you need to tickle in a wee bit more, just to cover them. So barely covered, don't push them right down to the bottom of the tube because they'll just take ages to find their way up, you know, and I don't know if they would run out of steam before they got there. And sometimes with children, and to enjoy watching germination happening, you could use an egg box to start a bean. The only clear difference is it's not as deep, and you can start the wee bean inside, so just fill that with compost again, maybe put it on a mushroom punnet to stop the water running everywhere. Obviously the cardboard goes soggy. You'll not get such a deep root run unless you have to move it on quicker into another pot. But for children in a wee growing exercise, it's still perfectly possible to do that. But if you've got the tubes in a deeper thing, you don't have to disturb the plant so soon. So the purpose of this is you get wee individual plants, and each individual plant can then be planted into the ground with the tube in situ if you want, but there'll be a wee root ball with it, so even the tubes will have gone a bit soggy and they may just fall apart then anyway, but the wee root ball should be self-contained. Another way to make a pot if you don't have cardboard tubes, this brand of pesto is a handy size for a little pot, and if I use some sheets of newspaper, I'll hold this up in a second to show you. If you roll it up in newspaper, as long as the lid is sticking out a wee bit, the jar stops there, and I've got a wee bit extra on the top, so roll it up and fold the bottom over, squish it on the table, and it gives you a little pot. Slightly awkward to stand it on its own, but I've just found from experience and sort of measuring these, if I make 6, they fit very comfortably in the mushroom punnet, and then the same as with the cardboard tubes, fill them up with your peat-free compost, and any spillage round will help to hold them up. And again, it's the same principle that the roots can circle inside there, give you a wee self-contained plant. You can plant it in the ground with the newspaper or without the newspaper, doesn't matter too much. And example here, one I grew earlier, that's a red flowered runner bean from my little cardboard tube setup here. So a wee bit leggy because it was growing in my house and it wasn't quite getting enough light. So they don't need a lot of heat to germinate. The household heat will be fine, but good light is usually important. I'm going to take it apart and show you, just to show you the parts of the plant. So we have the big fat seed there. They swell up to double their size once they've hydrated, you know. That's the stem coming up, the first set of true leaves, and the root knows to go down, and it's a good example of why the egg box is a bit shallow for growing one for any length of time. Once the first leaves come, this is a tall red flowered runner bean, so this will grow on up, needs something to climb on, twiggy sticks or a trellis or something. The first flowers will be lovely scarlet red ones. The bees will pollinate them, and once they're pollinated, the petals fall off, and then that flower that will elongate into a pod. Once you have your pod, you can eat them young and tender as whole pods, or you can leave them on the plant to grow on and the pod to dry out and the seeds rattle inside, and then that's you've got some either more beans for next year to plant or some beans to cook. And if you are coming down to the garden, you could find some activities of your own to do. If you recognise the part of the garden I'm standing in, I'm on the Caithness slabs, which are lovely rectangles with big cracks in between them, and they make a large square around the garden. You could come down and hop over every second one, or count the slabs around the garden. You could try and find all the colours of the rainbow in the flowers that are opening now, which I think is probably almost possible because we have quite a range of flowers. The garden's wakening up. And finally, just explore the garden and enjoy yourself. Thanks.